just like seeing her for the first time.
Night had fully blanketed the sky, casting long shadows over the jagged peaks of a secluded mountain range. The wind howled between the trees, and the cold, damp air hung thick with tension. Amid this eerie darkness, the sound of rapid footsteps echoed through the dense forest. A lone figure darted through the trees, his robes fluttering wildly with each desperate stride. It was a boy, exhausted, wounded, and terrified. That boy was Prince Yuan. His breathing was ragged, his body drenched in sweat, and his heart pounded violently in his chest. For what seemed like hours, he had been running, stumbling, through the woods in a futile attempt to escape the relentless assassins who pursued him. Their presence was a constant weight behind him, dark, swift, and merciless. They wore garments of black, their faces covered, and they moved like silent ghosts through the night. There was no mistaking their intent. They had come to kill. Branches tore at Prince Qian's skin as he ran. His limbs grew heavier with every step, his vision blurring from fatigue. But he couldn't stop. He knew that to pause, even for a moment, would mean death. And then his path ended. He came upon a sheer cliff, the ground falling away into darkness. Jagged rocks and sharp ledges stretched out below, making descent impossible. Panic rose in his chest. He turned back quickly, only to find the assassins already emerging from the shadows. They had surrounded him. He was trapped. Yuan's body trembled as he stood at the edge, bloodied and cornered. His back faced the drop, and before him were the assassins, silent and still, yet filled with murderous intent. There was no escape, no help, no future beyond this moment. His mind swirled with rage and despair. He knew why they had come. Though born a prince, he was not considered pure. His mother, once a low-born woman from a village, had been scorned by the royal family. Because of her humble origin, Yuan had never been accepted as a rightful heir. He was a stain on the royal bloodline, and now he was a target for execution. Hatred flared within him as he thought of the insults cast upon his mother. The dishonor, the sneers, the injustice, it boiled his blood. With trembling hands, he reached into his robes and drew out a small dagger. Hidden there for a moment like this. But the assassins were trained and ruthless. The moment they saw the glint of the blade, they surged forward. With brutal efficiency, they disarmed him, knocking the dagger from his hand and pinning him to the cold ground. He struggled, but they held him fast. Yet unknown to them, Prince Qian had prepared for this. From behind his waist, he pulled out a second dagger, hidden in secret. Without hesitation, without fear, he plunged it into the chest of one of his captors. Blood sprayed across the dirt. The man fell instantly. Shock rippled through the group. One of their own, dead, by the hand of a boy. Their eyes burned with fury. There was no room left for restraint. They descended upon Prince Qian with savage force. One of them stabbed him straight in the abdomen. He gasped, blood gushing from the wound as his strength left him. Another kicked him down, his body crashing against the earth. And then the beatings came. Kicks, stomps, blows rained down upon his weakened body. Bones cracked, blood spilled. The world around him began to fade. Yuan lay there, broken and helpless. His heart slowed. Darkness crept in, but just when all hope had vanished, light appeared, a sharp, radiant beam, unlike anything he had ever seen, shot from within the forest. It struck one of the assassins, and in an instant the man was gone, vaporized. No scream, no trace, just silence and dust. The remaining assassins froze. From the darkness stepped a figure, not cloaked in traditional robes, not bearing swords or martial stance, but clad in unfamiliar clothing. A long coat of synthetic material, glowing patterns, footwear unlike anything the ancient world could produce. The man was a stranger. No, something more, something foreign, something advanced. This man didn't speak. He moved, faster than any warrior they had faced, faster than the eye could follow. He struck with precision, using weapons that gleamed with light and emitted deadly energy. The assassins, trained to face the most powerful foes of the realm, stood no chance. One by one, they were taken down. Some tried to run. They were cut down mid-flight, beams of light piercing through the night. The forest lit up with momentary flashes, and then silence returned. None of the assassins survived. The man approached Qian Yuan. His gaze was calm, his presence radiating an authority and power that felt alien to the time. From his coat, he withdrew a small device, a metal injector filled with glowing fluid. Without explanation, he knelt and pressed it to Qian's neck. The substance entered Qian's bloodstream, advanced technology from a distant future. Nanomachines, microscopic agents capable of enhancing the body and connecting to vast systems of knowledge and control. Then the man spoke. His words were not angry, nor emotional. They were factual, almost clinical. He explained that Qian Yuan was his ancestor, and that he had traveled across time to save him. He did not elaborate, did not offer comfort. Instead, he said that Qian must live, and that in the future, he should raise better descendants, to avoid such tragedy from repeating. With that, the man vanished. As quickly as he had come, he disappeared into the shadows. Qian Yuan, bleeding and weak, now had something new inside him. A voice echoed inside his mind, mechanical, emotionless, precise. A system had activated. A presence, no longer human, began to speak. It confirmed registration. Qian Yuan had been accepted into the Sky Corporation, and the story of his transformation, from a hated prince to something far greater, had just begun. In the ancient past, the world had learned martial arts as a means of survival, to defend oneself against the ever-present dangers of life. At first, these techniques were pure, taught to protect and preserve. But as time passed, the purpose shifted. The sacred art of self-defense evolved into something darker, a weapon used for war, for murder, for domination. This change split the martial world into two opposing forces, the righteous and the wicked. Both sought power, both trained relentlessly, but their ideologies clashed. One side stood for justice and harmony, while the other embraced chaos and cruelty. Despite their differences, both factions shared a common goal to attain supreme strength. Power, above all, had become the purpose. Amid this world torn between light and shadow, the story of Prince Qian Yuan began to unfold. Morning light filtered gently into the room where Prince Qian lay. His body, once torn and broken, now rested in peace. He opened his eyes slowly, the weight of exhaustion still clinging to his limbs. He was alive, something he had never expected after the brutal events of the night before. His last memory was of blood, pain, and darkness. And yet now, he felt no wounds, no agony, no proof of the violent assault. His mind was clouded with disbelief. How was he still breathing? How had he survived such a merciless attack? Then, confusion turned to shock as he realized that the deep wounds he had sustained were gone. Not just healing, but entirely vanished, as if they had never existed. Before he could gather his thoughts, a voice echoed within his mind, calm, mechanical, and emotionless. It addressed him as master. The sound did not come from the room, nor from outside. It resonated within his brain itself, the same mind that had been altered the night before. The nanomachines injected into his body by the man from another time had activated. The voice explained things he did not understand. It spoke of systems and information, of capabilities and internal links. Among the terms was one that caught Prince Qian's attention, the name of an entity called the demonic god. The term puzzled him. He wanted to know more. He needed to understand. Meanwhile, just outside the room, a man who served as Prince Qian's personal attendant stood nervously. It was he who had found the prince the night before, unconscious, bloodied, and lying amidst the corpses of trained assassins. The sight had been beyond comprehension. Every assassin had been killed, yet the prince bore no injuries. He had hurried to summon a doctor at once. The physician arrived soon after, rushing to examine the young noble. To his astonishment, there were no wounds to treat. The prince's body was unscathed, healthy, untouched by the violence he had endured. It was a miracle, or something far beyond it. The servant and the doctor could not make sense of the scene. But one possibility lingered in their minds. that the assassins had come from the demonic cult, a secretive and feared organization known for their deadly martial arts and sinister motives. Back inside the room, Prince Qian tried to process the words he had heard. His curiosity about the demonic god drove him to request information from the system within him. At once, a surge of data flooded into his mind, images, names, definitions, histories, all at once. His brain, not yet accustomed to the overwhelming power of the nanomachines, could not handle the sudden input. A violent wave of nausea struck him. His head pounded with unbearable pressure. His stomach churned. Overwhelmed by the rush of knowledge, he bent over and vomited. The room spun as he tried to steady himself, his breathing erratic. The servant and the doctor, hearing the noise, entered the room quickly. They found the prince in distress, but alive. The doctor, after conducting another careful check, realized something surprising. Prince Qian's internal state had changed. His body had shifted, subtly, but surely. The boy who had once been dismissed and ignored was now ready. His body had reached a stage where he could begin the first steps of true martial cultivation. The gates had opened. Prince Qian Yuan, once viewed as weak and unworthy, had entered a path only the strongest could walk, and with the power of the nanomachines hidden within him, his journey was destined to be unlike any other. The demonic cult was an ancient, powerful organization shrouded in mystery and feared across the land. Though it was made up of numerous clans and families, true control rested in the hands of 6 dominant clans. These 6 held influence, authority, and strength above all others. Their bloodlines were pure, and their power was unmatched within the cult, as tradition dictated. Once a child of these clans reached the age of 10, they were sent to the demonic academy, a place designed to mold them into warriors. From a young age, they were trained to fight, to conquer, and to ascend. The goal of every clan was the same: to produce the strongest successor, one capable of claiming the seat of supreme power within the cult. Meanwhile, in a quiet room far from the noise and politics of the outside world, Prince Qian Yuan was awakening to a new reality. The air in his chamber was still, filled only with the soft rustling of cloth and the faint scent of herbs. The morning light cut through the wooden shutters, casting stripes across the room. Prince Qian sat up slowly, the events of the past 2 days still heavy on his mind. The nanomachines inside him had saved his life, healed his wounds, and opened a door to strength he never knew was possible. Lost in thought, he spoke aloud, not to anyone in the room, but to the voice inside his mind. The mechanical intelligence of the nanomachini responded immediately, and for a moment, Prince Qian forgot himself. He was so focused on the internal dialogue that he failed to notice the presence of another person in the room. The doctor who had come to care for him stood quietly nearby. Though he said nothing at first, his eyes narrowed. Prince Qian had never shown any remarkable talent before. He had been ordinary, even weak. But now, he was talking to thin air, and somehow possessed an immense potential that could not be explained. The doctor said nothing aloud, but a suspicion began to form in his mind. Later, Prince Qian was ordered to wash. His body had developed a sharp, foul odor, the result of toxins and residues being expelled during the nanomachine's reconstruction of his internal systems. The scent was unbearable, and a proper bath was needed. Prince Qian complied, as water poured over his skin. The young prince once again spoke with the nanomachini. The voice inside his mind explained what had happened. It had rebuilt the internal structure of his body. Every muscle, every organ, every system, enhanced, fortified, and rebuilt. His body was no longer what it had once been. It was faster, stronger, and more adaptable. Even deep cuts and injuries could now be healed almost instantly. Prince Qian stood in silence, awed by the revelation. The feeling of helplessness he had once carried now began to fade. In its place was a quiet determination. He no longer felt like a discarded prince. He was something more, something reborn. He returned to his room, dressed, and sat on the floor in quiet thought. His journey had changed. No longer would he simply struggle to survive. Now, he had a path and a purpose. He turned once again to the nanomachini and posed a question. What should he do next? The answer was immediate. He was told to seek out a martial arts manual. Books filled with techniques, training methods, and secrets. With such knowledge, his journey could truly begin. Prince Chian retrieved a manual from his room and opened it. The nanomachine activated instantly. In a moment, every word, every technique, every line of the book was scanned and transmitted directly into his brain. The information poured into him like a wave, and just like before, the sudden flood of data caused his head to spin. His stomach lurched, and his mind fought to stay steady, but he endured it. The dizziness passed, the nausea faded, and when it was over, Prince Chian smiled. He understood now. This power, this system inside him, allowed him to learn faster than anyone. He could absorb knowledge and skill at a pace no human could match. He no longer needed years of study. With the help of the nanomachine, he could learn in hours what others spent lifetimes mastering. His goal had shifted. He now set his sights on the 6 candidates, the heirs of the main clans of the demonic cult. They were strong, trained from childhood, and prepared to fight for the future of their clans. But Prince Chian would defeat them all. His ambition was clear. He would rise above them. He would conquer the academy. And one day, he would become the strongest of them all. The sun had barely begun to rise over the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the palace grounds. Inside his room, Prince Cheon Yuan sat wide awake, his thoughts racing. Sleep had not come to him at all that night. His mind was filled with the overwhelming potential of the strange and powerful system now living within him. The nanomachine had changed everything. His body, his mind, and perhaps even his fate. Restlessness gripped him. He paced, sat, stood again, and finally moved to the window. Drawing the wooden frame aside, he looked out into the quiet courtyard below. The early morning was still, save for a single figure, his servant Jang, who was deep in personal, martial training. Each movement was deliberate and focused, his breathing steady as he flowed through a series of practiced forms. As Prince Chian watched silently, the voice of the nanomachine echoed within his mind. It offered a suggestion, to scan and analyze Jang's movements. The idea struck him as both brilliant and unbelievable. If he could scan someone's technique just by watching them, it would be like stealing years of training in moments. It felt unfair, almost like cheating. Yet it also opened a door to rapid mastery that no one else could access. He agreed. At once, the nanomachine activated. Through his eyes, it began scanning every motion of Jang's martial sequence. The subtle weight shifts, the timing of breath, the positioning of limbs. All of it was captured with perfect precision. Prince Chian stood at the window for half an hour, completely focused, his gaze tracking every detail of Jang's movements. When the scan completed, the data was processed instantly. A surge of information entered Prince Chian's brain, not just theory, but practical motor control, posture alignment, balance, and reactive memory. His body trembled from the input. And then, in a single moment of silent clarity, he felt it. His body moved. He mimicked the movements he had just witnessed, flowing through the techniques with startling accuracy. It was far from perfect. He was not yet graceful or sharp, but he could now perform the very martial form Jang had trained years to master. The revelation was staggering, but the movements came at a cost. Although his brain could recall the techniques flawlessly, his body was not yet prepared to follow them. The muscles needed for such fluid motion were underdeveloped. The strength and flexibility required for precise execution simply did not exist within him. Not yet. But the nanomachine offered a solution with permission. It could rebuild his muscular system, forming the necessary fibers and tension needed to support advanced martial movement. Prince Chian agreed, without hesitation. The process began immediately. A searing pain ripped through his body as the nanomachines began restructuring muscle tissues from the inside. Ligaments stretched, fibers tore and reformed. Cells multiplied and aligned. Though there were no external wounds, the agony was unbearable. His knees buckled, his vision blurred, his body collapsed under the stress. Darkness overtook him as he lost consciousness on the floor. Moments later, Jang finished his practice outside and returned to the room, hearing nothing but silence. He entered quietly and found Prince Qian lying on the ground. His face was calm, as though he were simply sleeping. No signs of injury, no indication of distress. Jiang walked over, puzzled, but unconcerned. He assumed Prince Qian had simply fallen asleep after a restless night. But something else caught his eye: the floor. Faint impressions marked the ground where Prince Qian had been moving. Footprints, step patterns, evidence of someone practicing martial forms. Jiang stared at them in disbelief. He had served Prince Qian for 2 years. In that time, the young prince had shown no interest or ability in martial arts. Yet these footprints told a different story, one of effort, of training, of secret dedication. Jiang began to wonder if Prince Qian had been hiding his efforts all along, quietly preparing for something greater. What Jiang didn't know, what no one could know, was that a single night had changed Prince Qian forever, and his journey was only just beginning. The early morning air was still and cold. Inside the quiet chamber, Prince Qian Yuan slowly regained consciousness. His eyes fluttered open, and a dull ache pulsed through his limbs. Yet beneath the pain, he felt something new, something unfamiliar, yet powerful. His muscles were tighter, stronger, and his movements felt smoother. The reconstruction of his body by the nano machine had completed. He slowly sat up, testing the strength of his legs and arms. The difference was immediate. His center of balance had shifted, and his core no longer trembled under strain. The new structure within him supported his weight like never before, curious and eager. Prince Qian moved to a nearby sword stand and picked up a single training blade. With focused breath, he began to repeat the martial sequence he had memorized the day before. Each movement flowed naturally, his limbs aligned, without conscious effort. The training he had scanned from his servant, Jiang, was now imprinted in both mind and body. He repeated the form again and again, stepping, slashing, turning, and with each repetition, his feet struck the floor with greater precision. Gradually, faint marks began to appear on the ground. Footprints pressed into the floorboards. From the repeated force of his strikes and stances, Prince Qian noticed them and hesitated. He had created visible evidence of his training. A slight concern passed through him. If anyone were to see the markings, they might begin asking questions he was not yet ready to answer. Just then, the door slid open and Jiang entered with a tray of food. At the sight of his servant, Prince Qian acted quickly, hiding the dagger he had been using for practice. But Jiang didn't seem suspicious. He simply assumed that Prince Qian had been doing light training. To him, it was nothing out of the ordinary, especially now that Prince Qian was old enough to be sent to the demonic academy. Time passed quickly. The day of departure had finally come. The training grounds of the demonic academy were filled with noise and movement. Countless children and young warriors gathered under the banners of their clans. It was a grand occasion, the day when heirs from across the cult arrived to begin their path to strength. Among the crowd were the most important figures of this new generation, the 6 official candidates to succeed as future leader of the demonic cult. From the Dark Clan stood Qian Muyen, a figure whose gaze was calm but unreadable. From the Sword Clan came Qian Kyungwon, with a silent, sharp presence. Qian Mukiem, heir of the Spring Clan, stood tall with a relaxed but confident expression. Near him was Qian Zhang, some of the Poison Clan, his posture composed but his eyes filled with danger. Qian Yuchan represented the Blade Clan, a candidate whose demeanor was cold and precise. And then there was the only female candidate, Qian Wan Raya, of the Sound Clan. Her elegance stood out among the rigid postures of the others. She alone bore the distinction of being the only woman among the chosen heirs. All 6 shared the same blood, born of the same father, the lord of the demonic cult, but 2 different mothers. Their destinies were bound by lineage and ambition. As the crowd buzzed with anticipation, one person had yet to arrive, the 7th child, the forgotten one. Prince Qian Yuan, the so-called failure of the Qian family, had not yet appeared. Whispers moved through the crowd. Some mocked, others simply waited. But for the academy's overseers, his absence could not be ignored. Among them stood Li Huamyung, known throughout the cult as the Fire King. His authority at the demonic academy was absolute, and his eyes now scanned the gathering with annoyance. The candidates were nearly assembled, yet one was missing. The black sheep of the family. The one no one expected to rise. The one who now carried a secret that would change everything. The atmosphere outside the gates of the demonic academy was tense. Aspirants from across the cult gathered in droves, each one carrying their own hopes, ambitions, and fears. The path to becoming a leader within the demonic cult was not merely about bloodline, it demanded strength, cunning, and relentless will. For many, this day marked the beginning of that long and perilous journey. But for Prince Qian Yuan, the day had already presented a quiet challenge as he approached the entrance. He was stopped. The academy gatekeepers demanded an official proof of identity required to enter the grounds. Prince Qian searched calmly, but his tag was nowhere to be found. It had been deliberately taken from him, a calculated sabotage, likely orchestrated by those who wished to see him fail before he could even begin. He understood the intent clearly, but he did not let anger take hold. Instead, he stood in silence, composed, certain of his identity. The others questioned him, suspicious of his presence without documentation. But when they checked the records, the name Qian Yuan was undeniably present. No one could deny his bloodline. Despite the attempt to delay him, he was finally granted entry. The moment he stepped through the gates, a sound echoed across the academy. A powerful trumpet blast rang out, silencing the murmurs and movements of the crowd. Heads turned toward the large ceremonial platform at the center of the grounds. From behind a curtain of authority and presence, 4 powerful figures emerged, each one emanating a pressure that struck awe into the hearts of everyone present. Among them was Li Huameng, the Fire King, known for his immense strength and absolute control within the demonic academy. To his side stood Crazy Blade, Xiab Meng, a man with a sharp and dangerous aura. His reputation was known even beyond the cult's inner circle. Another was Merakum, the Guardian Chief, a figure cloaked in calmness, yet rumored to possess devastating power. And finally, at the center of them all, stood the supreme leader of the demonic cult, Lord Qianma himself, Qian Yuzhong. The air shifted as Qian Yuzhong stepped forward. He said only a few words, yet those words carried a weight beyond language. His voice, calm and composed, reached every corner of the academy grounds. Each syllable he spoke radiated overwhelming power. His presence alone made hearts tremble, minds sharpen, and bodies straightened. It was not a voice meant to be questioned. It was a force to be obeyed. For a brief moment, everyone from the most arrogant heirs to the quietest students felt the sheer immensity of the man before them. His words ignited a fire in their spirits, filled them with purpose, and reminded them of the power they sought to claim. Then, just as swiftly as he had arrived, Qian Yuzhong turned and departed, leaving the audience frozen in reverence. With the supreme leader gone, Li Huameng stepped forward to speak. He began explaining the structure of the academy. The demonic academy would span for years, divided into 6 progressive stages. Each stage would test the physical, mental, and spiritual limits of every student. And each student would be allowed only 1 attempt per stage. Failure at any point meant expulsion. There would be no second chances, but for those who succeeded, those who endured and completed all 6 stages, a reward awaited. Each victorious student would be granted a black dragon sphere, a mysterious artifact capable of increasing their lifespan by 120 years. Alongside it, they would receive a secret martial arts manual, an exclusive text holding advanced techniques and wisdom beyond the reach of ordinary disciples. The reward was immense, but so was the risk. The Fire King made it clear, the path would be more than difficult. It would be brutal, unforgiving, and deadly. Even if a person were brought back to life and tried again, they would still fail unless they were truly exceptional. The message was simple: only the strongest would survive. And from the back of the crowd, Prince Qian Yuan stood silently, his expression unreadable. The path before him was now clear, and the first step had already begun. The courtyard remained filled with the presence of hundreds of young warriors, each one standing in nervous silence after hearing the strict outline of the academy's rules. Standing at the front with unshaken authority was the Fire King, Li, who, MYUNG, his voice still echoing through the training grounds. His tone remained powerful, confident, and unwavering as he continued the orientation. He turned his gaze toward the 6 candidates, heirs of the 6 main clans, and gave them a warning: there would be no favoritism, although they were born from powerful lineages and carried the pride of their clans. None of that mattered inside the walls of the demonic academy. Every student would start at the same level, with no special privileges. Skill, effort, and strength alone would determine who would rise. Their blood meant nothing if their actions could not prove it. The Fire King's words struck deeply, especially to those who had grown used to special treatment. He made it clear this was a battlefield of merit. And then, with no hesitation, he delivered the next instruction. They were to form groups. It was the first part of the entrance examination, a trial of cooperation and instinct. The order to form teams sent confusion and resistance rippling through the gathered students. Voices rose in protest. Many complained, objecting to such an early test before even stepping into training halls. Some believed the test was unfair. Others simply did not understand the purpose behind it. The courtyard became noisy, filled with anxious murmuring. But the Fire King did not entertain arguments. He raised his voice, sharp and cutting like a blade. There was no room for negotiation. The command stood firm. Anyone who could not pass the first test would be immediately expelled. No warnings, no sympathy. Then came the explanation of the first challenge. They would be tested on their basic abilities, more specifically, their foundational Nigong, or internal energy control. The ability to manipulate this internal force was fundamental to all martial techniques. However, within the context of the demonic cult, Nigong had a darker reputation. It was often associated with cunning and deceptive methods, hidden techniques, meant to cripple, distract, or manipulate. Some of the students smiled confidently. They believed they held an advantage. Those who had trained in Nigong from an early age thought they would easily pass. But their confidence would be short-lived. A new presence stepped forward, a woman, elegant, yet cold, dressed in the robes of the Sound Clan. Her name was Hang So-yu, one of the elders. Without a word, she lifted her instrument, a strange and delicate-looking musical tool, and positioned herself before the crowd. Then, she began to play. At first, the sound was gentle, flowing like water. But within seconds, it changed. The melody twisted into something unnatural, sharp, invasive, and piercing. The air itself seemed to vibrate, and an invisible pressure began to push down on everyone present. What followed was chaos. The sound attacked the minds of the students. Their thoughts scattered. Their focus shattered. One by one, they collapsed. Some fell to their knees, others to the ground, clutching their ears. A few vomited. Several screamed in pain. The psychological assault was unbearable. The music twisted through their consciousness like knives. It was not mere sound, it was a weapon. Even the 6 main candidates, the pride of their clans, were caught in the storm. Each of them tried to resist, but their bodies trembled and gave way. Their knees hit the ground. Sweat poured from their faces. Blood began to leak from the ears of those closest to Hang So-yu. But amidst the broken crowd, one figure stood tall. Prince Qian Yuan. He remained still, his expression confused rather than pained. Around him bodies dropped and writhed, but he did not flinch. He looked around slowly, unsure why everyone was reacting with such intense suffering. Inside his mind, the NANO had acted on instinct, detecting a dangerous sonic frequency. It had immediately deactivated Prince Qian's sense of hearing to prevent damage. The auditory nerves were temporarily shut down, shielding him completely from Hang So-yu's psychological assault as the elder played more intensely. Frustration began to show. She increased the intensity, pouring greater force into her performance. The vibrations became violent, nearly ripping through the lungs and minds of the students. More blood spilled, more bodies dropped. Yet Prince Qian remained unaffected. He stood alone in the chaos, seemingly untouched by the attack, from their positions on the ground. The 6 candidates raised their heads, eyes wide with disbelief. Their bodies shook from pain, but their gaze turned toward the one anomaly amidst the destruction, and what they saw stunned them beyond words. Behind them, where no one expected strength or resistance, stood the one they had dismissed. The failed child, the forgotten seventh son. Prince Qianyuan had not fallen. The battlefield of sound had not yet ended. In the midst of dozens of fallen students, Prince Qianyuan remained the only one standing, still upright with calm in his expression. His posture did not carry arrogance, only quiet confusion. Around him, groans echoed through the air, as others clutched their heads and ears in agony. Yet Prince Qian stood unaffected. His senses shielded by the automatic defense of the Enomakin, it had completely disabled his hearing, without sound reaching his mind. The devastating melody of Hang Soyu's instrument failed to touch him. He could see the chaos, the suffering, and the pain, but he could not hear it. And that difference, though invisible to the others, made him the only one untouched. Hang Soyu watched from the front. Her eyes filled with disbelief. She had increased the intensity of her music beyond what most humans could endure. Her performance was not only a show of power, it was a test of psychological endurance, a weapon meant to expose weakness. And yet, that one boy still stood, untouched, unmoved, and unbroken. The emotion swelled within her disbelief, turning to irritation, and irritation to fury. Hang So, you began to push the tempo of her melody into its most aggressive form. She poured her anger into the strings, determined to break the last figure standing. Her instrument shrieked with malicious force, causing many of the still conscious students to bleed from their ears. Even some of the elite candidates writhed in agony. But Prince Qianyuan remained. He saw the intensity in her expression and realized the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. If he continued to stand while everyone else fell, it would only draw more suspicion. His very survival would look unnatural. He understood it was necessary to appear vulnerable, even wounded. For the sake of blending in, he sent a command. To the nanomachine prince, Qian asked it to inflict internal damage to his body. Enough to convince others he had not escaped the test unscathed. The nanomachine calculated his request and initiated the internal injuries. The result was nearly fatal. Though he had asked for moderate damage, the restructuring of his body meant his pain threshold was still adjusting. A 30% internal damage level hit him like a thunderbolt. His legs buckled. Blood surged from his throat. He coughed violently, collapsing to his knees as crimson liquid spilled from his mouth and nose. From the stage, Li Huamyung, the Fire King, stepped forward immediately. He had watched the ordeal with growing concern. Though Prince Qian was from a lesser clan and carried little status, he was still a son of the Lord Qianma himself. His death during the entrance test would become a political disaster, one that even he could not explain away. As Hang So-yu prepared to unleash her final wave of sound, the Fire King raised his hand and stopped her. His voice, firm and commanding, told her to end it. If she continued, there would be no survivors left. The point had been made. Reluctantly, Hang So-yu ceased her performance. As silence returned to the academy grounds, Li Huamyung hurried to Prince Qian's side. He watched the boy writhe in pain, his body trembling, blood still dripping from his mouth. And yet, despite everything, the boy had endured longer than anyone else. It was almost unbelievable. Curious, the Fire King reached out and placed a hand on the boy's chest, sensing for internal energy. Nigong, what he discovered left him speechless. There was nothing. Prince Qianyuan had no not even a trace. He had stood through the most devastating psychological assault without the aid of any internal energy technique. His survival had been built on sheer willpower and reckless determination. The Fire King immediately gave the order for Prince Qian to be taken for emergency medical treatment. His body was far too damaged to recover on its own, and the situation had already gone far enough. Hang So-yu, still visibly upset, stepped away with frustration. She had never imagined a child without Nigong could resist her performance for so long. Her pride had been tested in the shadows nearby. Another figure observed with interest. Siab Meng, known as Crazy Blade, looked toward Prince Qian's weakened form with a gleam of curiosity. A rare smile touched his lips. He began to step forward, intending to approach the boy. But before he could take another step, Li Huamyong moved to block his path. Tensions sparked between them instantly. The Fire King stared firmly at Siab Meng, making it clear that now was not the time for tests or confrontations. Siab Meng hesitated, but after a brief pause, he backed down, not out of respect for Prince Qian, but to avoid a direct conflict. With Li Huamyong, though, he turned away. Siab Meng did not forget the boy. The failed son of the Qian family had endured a trial that no one else had. And now, a silent interest had begun to grow. On the second floor of the Demonic Academy's medical wing, a quiet and peaceful atmosphere lingered, a rare kind of silence for such a brutal institution. Inside one of the treatment rooms, a man named Beek Jong, Myung, sat waiting. As one of the Academy's few medical professionals, his days were often filled with preparation, not action. It was rare for anyone to visit him. Injuries were usually handled by martial arts instructors, or endured through sheer will. When a knock came at the door, and a student was brought in, Beek Jung Meng's eyes lit up with surprise and curiosity. He never expected to receive an actual patient so early in the semester. But that surprise turned to horror the moment he laid eyes on the boy. Prince Qian Yuan was covered in blood, his breathing shallow and his face pale. A red stain had dried across his chin and robe from the blood he had vomited earlier. To Beek Jong, Myung, it looked like the boy had been pushed far beyond his physical limits. He began asking questions to the academy staff member who had escorted Qian. The answers made little sense. No one could explain why such a young child was brought in with wounds so severe. Beek Jong Myung was unsettled, uncertain what kind of training methods had caused this level of trauma so soon. As he was still trying to understand the situation, a loud crash shattered the tension. The window exploded inward in a rain of glass and wind. A figure leapt into the room with wild momentum. It was Seo B. Meng, the infamous Crazy Blade. His sudden entrance startled everyone. But to Beek Jong Myung, it was an all-too-familiar disruption. The two men had a long and bitter history. Beek Jong Myung had once been a student under Siab Meng, though their relationship was anything but harmonious. Arguments and conflict had defined their connection more than mentorship now. Standing over the unconscious boy, Siab Meng scowled. He didn't believe for a second that the child was still unconscious. In his eyes, the injuries were too clean, too theatrical. He muttered that the boy was pretending to sleep, faking his condition. Without hesitation, Siab Meng raised his hand threateningly, declaring that if Xian didn't wake up soon, he'd strike him to force a reaction. And just like that, Prince Qian Yuan opened his eyes. His body still ached from the internal damage caused by the nanomachine. He was trying to hold his composure, even as he struggled to breathe normally. His thoughts raced, wondering whether Siab Meng had figured out that his injuries had been self-inflicted. If this man saw through the illusion, everything might fall apart. But as Prince Qian watched Siab Meng's face, something became clear. The man didn't know the truth. Siab Meng wasn't interested in the nature of the wounds, only in the boy himself. His interest came from instinct, not evidence. He was simply fascinated by Prince Qian's behavior and resilience. Without warning, Siab Meng made an announcement that stunned everyone in the room. He would take Prince Qian Yuan as his personal disciple. The words fell like thunder. Even Beek Jong Myung froze at the absurdity of the declaration. The room, once quiet, was filled with disbelief. Prince Cheon himself was more confused than anyone. He tried to make sense of it, questioning whether this was a trap, a test, or some elaborate setup. He knew his identity, as the seventh prince was seen as a stain among the great clans. His status was weak, his reputation worse. For Siab Meng to take him in as a student was bound to bring consequences. Political backlash, scrutiny, and possibly even punishment. Yet Siab Meng didn't care. As Prince Qian hesitated, Siab Meng reached into his robe and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. He tossed it toward the boy, a paper marked with strange symbols and official insignia. It was a key, a pass. Siab Meng told him what it meant. The second test at the Demonic Academy would not be something that could be overcome without the use of Nagong. Without internal energy, Survival was impossible. The note he offered was more than symbolic. It was a lifeline, a direct bridge to the next stage, now. Prince Qian understood. This was no trap. It was an opportunity wrapped in danger, with unclear consequences. But in a world where strength was the only truth, even uncertain chances had to be taken. Inside the quiet room on the second floor of the demonic academy, Prince Qian Yuan lay in bed, slowly regaining strength. Across from him stood Xiab Meng, whose curious gaze had not left the boy since the moment they met. Despite the relatively peaceful setting, Qian remained wary. His mind stayed alert, especially as he feared that anything he said might accidentally expose the existence of the nanomachine. His greatest secret, Xiab Meng seemed relaxed, but there was calculation behind his every word. He casually began to speak, explaining why. Out of all the students who had collapsed during the first test, Qian was the only one brought to the medical floor. At first, this seemed unfair. Many others had suffered under the sonic assault of Hang So Yu. Yet none were given medical treatment. Qian's irritation began to grow. But then, Xiab Meng clarified the reason was simple. All the other students, even those weakened by the test, possessed Nigong. They had the ability to sit in meditation and restore their inner balance. Their training allowed them to recover without assistance. But Qian had none of that. His body, damaged by artificial means, lacked any self-healing capacity. That was why he alone had to be carried away. It was a painful truth. Qian clenched his fist at the realization. What others had naturally, he still lacked. His power came from elsewhere, and yet he couldn't deny that truth had given him perspective and motivation. Suddenly, he remembered something. The Fire King Li Huimyung had previously declared that anyone who completed all 6 stages of the Academy's training would be rewarded with a black dragon sphere, a miraculous item that could extend life and grant massive power. When Qian brought this up, Xiab Meng laughed. It wasn't a mocking laugh, but one laced with amusement and familiarity. He told Qian that the Fire King had conveniently left out a crucial detail, something most students wouldn't learn until it was too late to actually earn the Black Dragon Sphere. A student had to conquer all 6 floors of the Academy. Each floor contained a hidden trial, strict access rules, and restricted learning. Even once inside, they would only be granted 2 hours, not a second more, to study the manuals kept within. No one was allowed to freely browse or take the books. Too. Most that wasn't nearly enough time. Even Xiab Meng admitted that in 2 hours. He himself could only study 2 manuals thoroughly. Qian, however, processed the information differently. For him, 2 hours might be enough to absorb hundreds. With the help of the nanomachines, instant learning, and memory synchronization, even a brief exposure to martial arts manuals could be more than enough to gain mastery. His attention shifted to the piece of parchment beside him. He recognized it now. The breathing technique, the same one Xiab Meng had offered earlier. His instincts were correct, and Xiab Meng confirmed it. With a simple nod. It was, in fact, a fundamental Nigong breathing technique. The key to unlocking internal energy flow. A quiet determination began to rise inside Qian. He knew what he had to do. Gathering strength, he pulled himself up from the bed. Then, in a formal and humble gesture, he lowered his head to the floor once, and then again. The gesture of a disciple, requesting to be accepted by a master. It was clear, and without hesitation, Xiab Meng's eyes gleamed with joy. There was something about this boy, this so-called failed prince, that deeply fascinated him. And now, the boy was willingly offering himself as a student. Xiab Meng accepted, and with a rare, satisfied smile, he turned to his former disciple, Baek Jung Myung, and assigned him the responsibility of guiding Qian through the healing process. Elsewhere, outside the medical quarters, the central training ground of the demonic academy began to settle into calm. Students, many still shaken by the previous trial, now sat in meditation. The sound-based psychological assault from earlier had left them, rattled, but not broken. Using their cultivated Nigong, they began the slow process of recovery, channeling energy into their meridians to heal internal wounds. not all had succeeded. Several students had already been disqualified, unable to withstand the pressure of the test. Their complaints echoed through the halls, cries of unfairness, of being thrown into a serious trial without warning. One even attempted to rebel against the instructors, but was quickly subdued and removed from the academy without hesitation. The environment had become harsh, and no one could afford weakness. Despite the intensity, the 6 great clan heirs had endured without major difficulty. Their discipline, years of training, and powerful bloodlines had made them formidable. Among them, Qian Muyan of the Dark Clan and Qian Yuchan of the Blade Clan stood out. Both had passed the sonic trial without even flinching, sitting motionless through the entire assault, earning respect and fear from their peers. Li Huamyung watched all of this unfold with interest. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of excitement. The incoming generation showed promise, and a few unexpected elements, like the strange resilience of Prince Qian Yuan, made things even more unpredictable. The academy had only just begun, but the path forward was already blazing with heat.